In this film, we will be exploring one of the Methodist Church's principles for justice. We'll be doing this alongside 8 different Methodists. God made humans in the image of God, each worthy of equal value and dignity. What does this mean to you?
So I think being made in the image of God means reflecting God in ourselves, but seeing God reflected in other people, and really those characteristics of a loving God who wants things to be right for everybody, and for those relationships to be right.
To me, being made in the image of God reminds me that my value and my identity are tethered in God. They are unmovable, they are unchangeable, just like God's identity, that who I am is rooted in God. And I have to remember that that's true for other people as well, even when I don't find people very easy to love, or I find the behaviour of others difficult. I remember that their value and their identity is rooted in God as well. And that has to change how I treat people, how I relate to people, even when it's hard.
I think it really challenges us to think about how we see other people, and particularly people that are perhaps different to us or have different life experiences or have made different choices, to really see God in a different way. I suppose it's very easy to see God in the way that we're used to, but perhaps more challenging to see God in a different way of being.
I'm often struck by the biblical phrase in Genesis, "Let us make human beings in our own image." God in God's self loved his creation so much that he wanted to place within it parts of himself, images of himself. And that means, therefore, to God, everybody matters. And one of my favorite phrases is, all people matter to God, and therefore they should matter to us. So people being imaged on the image of God is about people being received just as they are. It is not for us to change people. I don't think even the church has the power to change anything. I think it is for us to exemplify God-likeness. That begins justice. Because God-likeness cannot embrace or embody anything negative to Godhood. It is therefore for me important to know that you cannot separate the image of God from being a just person, a just society, and a just activist. These are all intertwined to me.
If all people are made in the image of God, then we need to challenge ourselves on the idea that anybody is inferior to anybody else. We have to actively choose to see everybody as equal. This comes into sharp focus when we look at this concept of seeing deaf and disabled people as somehow inspiring. I really dislike applying that term inspiring to deaf and disabled people. That's not the aim of my life. My life is not here to inspire other people. I am made in the image of God, truly and fully. We need to be careful not to pity or patronize disabled people with that term inspiring, and instead see them as equals.
In El Salvador, for so many years, we experienced a lot of violence from the gangs. And you can see all the bad things that the gangs has done to the people by the years. But when you can reach one of them and when you have access to them, you can find that there is a little spark of God's image in their lives. And because that little spark that hasn't been lost, you can work with them in order that they can change their life. But not only to change it like kind of spiritual action, but also as the reality around them changes, then they can change as well. Sometimes we want to pray, but pray is not enough. We have to do something to change the reality of people. And as the reality changes, people can change and transformation can come up.
There are moments of representation for disabled people throughout the scriptures, finding themselves in the image of God, a real source of empowerment for disabled people. So, for example, in Ezekiel chapter 1, in the vision of God sat on a chariot with these four wheels, there's a moment there for disabled people, particularly those who are wheelchair users, to see themselves represented there with God almost in a wheelchair. It's a challenge for non disabled people to rethink these moments. Another challenge on standard perceptions would be God as a sign language user.
We have a good example in the Bible, in Genesis, with God when he talked to Cain about what he did to his brother. He killed him. It was a horrible story, but Cain was expecting the death. When he recognizes, it is good to recognize what is bad, what has been done. And also, God put a mark on Cain in order that he can realize that wasn't good, doesn't need to be repeated. But at the same time, God didn't kill him. Actually, he allowed him to continue alive, and that's a beautiful story in the Bible. That if we see that image of God in people's life, we can give new opportunities to people.
The search for justice entails treating others with respect and may involve reclaiming lost worth. What does this mean to you?
I think reclaiming lost worth takes time and it takes action. It's not just about telling people they are valuable to us, but about really showing it with how we live and what we do. And I think we're reminded that time and time again in the Bible, particularly in some of the parables and the gospel stories that Jesus tells, where again and again we see people losing something that's valuable to them, whether it's a coin, the woman who lost the coin in Luke, or the pearl of great price. These things aren't just valuable for the sake of them, but because of the action people take to find them again. They hunt and they search and they work hard to find it. And when they have, they can't wait to tell people about it again. And I think that really shows us that reclaiming lost worth is about the action we take to prove to people and perhaps to all of creation that it's of value to us. When I was campaigning on the asylum and refugee system, when the Nationality and Borders Bill was coming through, I went along to an event to tell people about the policy aspect of the campaign. And most of the event was given over to praying for people who worked in the Home Office, perhaps the MPs and the ministers responsible for the legislation that we were campaigning against. And it really surprised me, but it reminded me that when we pray for others, we are changed, as well as praying for change. It reminds us the value that God gives them and that they are people made in the image of God as we pray for them.
So much of my work has focused on sign language research with the deaf community across the world. That work is important to me. I see it as a calling from God to bring that worth back to deaf people. So many deaf people who grew up using signed languages found that their languages were stigmatized. They began to internalize those negative attitudes, losing their self worth and starting to believe that their language was inferior to spoken languages. Time and time again throughout my research, I found evidence of this expressive, deep richness of signed languages, absolutely equal to spoken languages. I worked with research teams in the Caribbean and in Indonesia, and as we were working, those researchers finding for themselves pride in their signed languages, that they were equal to spoken language. That research is so empowering to the deaf community worldwide.
So reclaiming lost worth, I think, starts initially by thinking about where do people find their value, where do people find their worth in the world as a whole, and often I think people put their values and their worth in things that are temporary, things that are transient, and not in a fixed place. And by fixed place, I suppose I mean in God, in that sense of something that is there from the beginning of time and will be there till the end of time. And when your value changes because of situations and circumstances around you, then I think it can be a really lonely place to be, to suddenly find that everything that you've set your store in has changed or shifted. And it's then that sort of coming back to God, or finding God for the first time, experiencing God for the first time, and that real permanence of God enables you to reclaim that space, to find a value in yourself that perhaps you'd never experienced before. I think it's a really challenging space to be, to maintain someone's dignity when you vehemently disagree with them.
It reminded me of an instance where I was invited through the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Southern Africa to meet a previous jailer of mine, a person who'd been one of my jailers when I was in prison for political beliefs. And part of me rebelled. Part of me wanted to say, no, I have nothing to do with that individual. And that prospect of being reminded in that moment of no about the fact that they too bear the image of God, and that if they've taken the step, the intentional step to want to meet those whom they've oppressed and actually sit across the table from them, who am I to deprive them? But I knew that wasn't going to be easy. It was probably the worst painful circumstance beyond my oppression that hit me sitting opposite my jailer and having to say to him, ultimately, I forgive you. There's a sense in that where you have to forgo who you are, to enable another to reclaim for themselves the image of God, whether they are an oppressor or the oppressed. There is a call to forgo who we are. At that moment, I had to forgo who I am. I had to excuse myself for who I think I am. And I had to embody a presence and a willingness that says to the other person, I am happy to listen. Doesn't mean I'm not hurt. And it doesn't mean I have forgotten. But I'm happy to listen. And who knows, from what I hear, I don't know where that will take us. But at least you were intentionally happy to make this overture, and I am happy to listen. We never became friends or started having barbecues together and whatever the case might be. But when we left that room, the two of us felt like a truckload of heavy burdens had been lifted off our shoulders. When we are able to let go of that which presses us down, and in this instance, the resentment, the pain, the hate I harbored about my jailers, in that moment I could let it go. I probably didn't want to. I probably found it difficult to let it go. But at that moment, I felt relieved that I had agreed to go and meet him. To hear him say to my face, I'm sorry for what I did. And to hear myself as if in another human being's body respond and say, I forgive you, which I'd never intended to say going into that room, tells me that we have a responsibility to even the oppressor, to remind them that they too are made in the image of God.